Well, hello everyone. Hello, hello, hello. It's just coming up for 6:30 UK time. I'm going to welcome you, and if you'd like to put in the comments, those of you that are already here, we're going to wait a little while to see if everyone turns up. I know there are a few of you. We've got over 20 actually. If you just want to let me know in the chat where you're from, and anything about you, really, what you're hoping to achieve today from our presentation. I'd love to hear from you. And I know we've got, I think, Ritu's here, so I'm going to basically do a 45-minute presentation. Oh, brilliant. Yes. Chronic procrastination, Ritu. Yes, yes. Hello, Laura Adams and Lisa Warmby. You're from Nottingham. Yes, great place. Been there. Enjoyed it very much. I'm hoping to learn something different. Yes, good. Andrew, yes, this is where you chat. Okay, you're recovering from chemo. Wow. Well, very big welcome to you. I hope to be able to talk a little bit about kind of how we heal today, but in perhaps a different way. And Carolyn, hi Carolyn, you're Northamptonshire, wonderful. Great to see you all. This is a bit of an experiment for me, doing a YouTube live. I normally do Teams, as you all know. Oh, Barbara from Vienna, welcome, welcome. And Carolyn Moss-Williams from North Wales, excellent. I know we had about 80 people sort of express an interest, but some of them probably won't be able to make it live, but we are recording, of course. So, oh, Farah, hello from Bedford. How are you? Hope you're doing well. And in a moment, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to make a start on the subject that you guys voted for, because we had three possible titles, and we went in the end from survival to inner ease, and that's the subject I'm going to be covering today, bringing in all sorts of interesting materials. So very excited to get going with you. Maria, hi Maria from Norfolk. To stop ruminating. Well, don't we all? That's a really classic sign, I think, of a brain that won't stop, that won't shut down, that feels like it's in fight and flight the whole time. Okay, yeah. So I've got a 45-minute presentation. I know that because I did a test run earlier today, and I recorded it just in case there was a terrible glitch tonight, because you never know with live tech. And certainly there was a bit of a panic earlier when some of my slides weren't showing on the recording, but let's hope, as I say, if it doesn't work for any reason, we've got a recording that I've done previously and you'll all have access to that. So, all right, I think we'll get started, and then after the presentation, I'll stop sharing and then we can come together, and if anybody's got questions, I'll do my best to answer. And my aim is to be done in an hour. I don't want to take too much of your time. It's precious. And I'm hoping that you'll get bags of really, really excellent information from this hour. So let me just share my screen then. And it's going to look slightly strange initially. Let's get the, that's it. And hopefully you can see that. I'll hide that. Okay, so from survival mode to inner ease, a true nervous system reset. Okay, and just a quick outline, what we're doing. We're going to be doing why medicine gets it so wrong. I'm not sure why that's happening. Let's go back. What is survival mode and why does it happen? Then we're going to look at brain and nervous system imbalance from emotional trauma and sensitivity, because I think those two things are really key. We'll look at some somatic techniques to inner ease, so how to reverse the programming, and lasting solutions right at the end. I'm going to be introducing my nervous system reset program, brand new, and very much in pilot mode at the moment, but we're very excited to be releasing this. So I've been working on it for the last, well, probably 2 years, to be honest, and I'll be going through what that is and how you can join in if you're interested. So stick around, no filler material, just killer information. And let's get going. All right, a little bit about me. Sorry, folks, but you do need to know where I come from and why. So my story, I like to say I had a normally dysfunctional childhood, okay? Fairly regular, but there were some things in it that did upset my nervous system quite significantly. The first thing, bereavement of I lost my father when I was about 18. And before that, we had a lot of issues with him being chronically ill for, over 10 years of my teenage life. And of course, therefore, a lot of anxiety in the family over how we would cope if he died, which he did in the end. I think my mother found that extremely hard. Now, I went on into adulthood. I did all the things that you're supposed to do, got a job, got a partner, got a home, I moved into adult life. But around the age of 32, it all came crashing down, quite literally. And despite believing myself to be a very strong individual, very driven, actually, quite A-type, if I'm honest, I suddenly found that I had a problem moving. I had a problem actually with my energy, and I couldn't get out of bed in the mornings. I couldn't survive the day without having to rest in the afternoon, and I just felt absolutely awful. I had a crash, I guess you'd say, around that time, and I did everything that anybody would normally do. I went to the doctors and tried to get solutions, but none were forthcoming, really. And so I had to find my own solutions. And that began a period of extreme learning and turning the tables on everything I thought I knew, because I had studied science at uni. I had done biological sciences. I thought I knew what happened in the human body when we got sick and how to heal. And I learned that, in fact, I knew very little about healing. And so it really propelled me into a new life direction, which has totally changed who I am and what I do. And I'm now a specialist, unbelievably for me, because this wasn't part of my life plan. I'm a specialist in trauma recovery, anxiety release, and chronic fatigue syndrome, sometimes also called ME, and all kinds of unexplained medical symptoms, like long COVID, which is the classic recent disease that's come to the fore, I think, and totally changed the landscape. In September 2015, I published my first book, this one, The Scar That Won't Heal. That was a book on trauma and emotional healing, because I couldn't find a book out there that actually covered this. Around about the same time, Bessel van der Kolk published his, The Body Keeps the Score, and, very similar what we covered, but, I was talking perhaps from a more personal experience. And I was certainly more focused on emotions as the underlying language, as it were, of your mind and body. I then followed that up with a PhD in 2016 in trauma and chronic pain, because I was fascinated by the links between those two things. And now I see clients one-to-one, in groups also. I have a community program, and I design courses like the one you're about to see later, and professional courses as well for practitioners alongside the chrysalis effect. And I've written more books. I have probably 6 or 7 books now. So that's really what I've been focusing on. But of course, my time is limited, and I need a program that people can do alongside support from me, where they can, fast track their recovery, and not go through what I had to go through, you know, the years of struggle and learning to get well again. Because we have a silent epidemic going on right now. I don't know if you agree with me, but this silent epidemic of mind-body problems that are really poorly treated in modern medicine. And in fact, there's a whole field called medically unexplained symptoms, or MUS, and chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia, long COVID, etc., are great examples of this. They're all syndromes, and a syndrome is really a collection of symptoms. It's a description rather than a diagnosis, okay? And so, you know, when you get a diagnosis like this, really it's not telling you why. And modern medicine, therefore, struggles to alleviate these conditions because it doesn't have a model that fully explains them. In particular, it doesn't explain anxiety that seems to have no root cause, which is, you know, so endemic at the moment. Pain that doesn't go away, what we term chronic pain, or fatigue that doesn't get better with rest. It's not about having overdone it, it's because your energy metabolism has really been hijacked. And of course, there are all the myriad symptoms that coexist with these syndromes, the ones that nobody really talks about. And if you go online and you try and find answers, you'll come up with a blank, really. Things like migraine, vertigo, tinnitus, that ringing in the ears, brain fog, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, bit of a mouthful, IBS, fainting, when it happens regularly, is a mind-body issue, I believe. It's also called syncope. Dissociation, people who just aren't present in their bodies and don't know how to get back. They feel disconnected. People who have difficulty swallowing, that's one I had, a really mysterious symptom. PCOS, you know, it's really common with women that their hormonal balance gets upset. So polycystic ovary syndrome and dysmenorrhea, painful periods. All of these have no real explanation as to why. You're told it's just one of those things, or, you know, it's hormonal, or it's just something that's arising, but it will probably get better on its own. That's what I was told. So what on earth is going on here? Why is it that we have no explanation for these really common experiences? Maybe, just maybe, we have the wrong map. And look, what's wrong with the current medical model? Now, I've been going on about this extensively for the last 10 years because I experienced it. I went through the medical model and expected it to heal me, and it didn't. Well, basically, medicine, as we currently experience it, is based on largely an infectious disease model, or acute medicine model, where the problem that we're experiencing is localized in the tissue that has the symptom. Okay, now that's not necessarily the case, because in the 1990s, the work of a very pioneering doctor, Dr. John Sarno, he showed that chronic pain, for instance, is unrelated to the area in which it occurs. It's actually created in the brain for a very specific reason. He wrote a marvelous book called The Mind-Body Prescription. He also wrote one called Healing Back Pain, and a few others, but this is his magnum opus, as it were. You see, medicine focuses on the symptom primarily, not the person experiencing the symptoms. And it uses testing to diagnose and find out what's missing or what's not working properly, and then drugs or surgery to treat. Really, they don't have much more in their armory than that. But what if the tests come back negative and you still feel horrible? That's what happened to me. I had just myriad tests, you know, and everything was normal, but I still felt dreadful. And the drugs can, and did for me, make me feel worse, and they might have done so for you too. We need a new model, which includes the fact that the mind and the body are communicating as an integrated system. It's a mutual dialogue between the two. There's no separation. You know, modern medicine is not designed to consider the mind. It really separated out the body for historical reasons. And the unconscious mind, the bit that nobody's really aware of, is completely ignored in the creation of health and disease. And so it's my mission really to bring this back. You see, physical and emotional well-being are intimately linked. They use the same system, okay? You can't separate the physical and emotional. They are one and the same thing. And therefore, ignoring the emotional is basically only dealing with half the problem. And the final thing, which I think we really need, is the importance of the unconscious programming from past experience. Okay, what happened to you before you got sick is really, really important, because it changes the neurological and cellular responses to create disease. If your experiences were ones which set your system on a stress response. And so Sarno, he proposed that the brain creates pain as a distraction from the perceived danger of unfelt or unresolved emotions. Now that, as you can imagine, in the 1990s was heresy. Okay, nobody understood what on earth he was on about. How could emotions do anything? They were just feelings. But you know, he stuck with this, and he said that what the pain or the symptom does is it keeps you focused on the symptom and not the root cause. And so it's having a function. And medicine then still today perpetuates these kind of focusing on symptoms with messages of fear and you know, hopelessness. You know, whatever you've got, we don't know. And we don't know if it'll ever get better. You just have to manage it. And so you get into this round of tests and results and fear, and you get very, very stuck, as I did. And so I really want to introduce you to your nervous system as the basis for all of these symptoms and why they persist. You see, the primary function of your autonomic nervous system is to ensure survival of the physical body, our physical body. And it not only regulates our physiology, but also our emotional states, which drive our behavior. Okay, so it's looking at both the emotional and the physiological. And emotions actually speak to your physiology. They actually have a communication with it. And this drives our behavior, because most of our behavior is emotional, believe it or not. It's just very hidden from us. The autonomic nervous system is also automatic, it's unconscious, and it uses emotions as the language of the system, okay? So emotions are key. They're not just feelings, they are physiological regulators. The other thing you need to know is that brain development is very subject to early environment. Okay, so human brains, unlike most mammals, are very immature at birth. Okay, and it therefore is very subject to the environment when it develops. And there's a whole field of investigation called neuroplasticity, which is looking at how the brain adapts to its environment by changing the wiring, if you like, the neurological connections. And I do go into that in a lot more detail in the Reset program. But for now, understand that your environment changes your brain. That's the most important thing you need to understand. And so it's not fixed. It isn't just stuck the way it is. It's actually learning. And it's also learning to predict based on your past experience. So in order to survive, it has to shortcut some of the difficult processes and, you know, very energy hungry processes. So it learns to predict, because that's a much quicker way of producing a behavioral response without having to analyze all the different inputs. So whatever happened to you before that worked in some way is going to be the pattern that the brain uses in the here and now to make sure that you get a quick response. And the other thing I think is really, really important is that the brain is really separated into three distinct regions, if you like, that most of which is completely unconscious. And if we just look at this very basic model, which is called the Triune Brain. And this is a very old model now from the 1960s, but still, I think, has relevance today. And you'll see that the way that the brain has developed over evolution is to add on rather than redesign. And so, you know, we start with the lizard brain, which is the base of the brain stem, the cerebellum, and that's the basis of kind of all our automatic actions. Fight and flight, for instance, is really its main output. And then there's the mammalian brain in the middle, and that's all about emotions and memories and habits, which lead to us making decisions. And finally, there's this, the blue region here, the human brain, and that's the neocortex, new cortex. And that's all about language and abstract thought and imagination, and some say the seat of consciousness, although I would argue with that. But this is all about reason and analysis and logic. And we like to think we belong in this area, and that's how we motivate ourselves, and that's how we do what we do. But in actual fact, to be fair, most of our processing happens here in these two original older brains, the lizard brain and the mammalian brain. And in fact, it's where the autonomic nervous system originates, is in this lower part of your brain. And so it responds not to thinking, not to analysis or reason or logic, but to feelings, to emotions, to unconscious processing. And so these two parts of your brain are probably more important in some ways than this part, which has been largely credited with making us human, but it ignores the input of these early brains that we also possess. And now just looking a bit more into the brain development. And so after we're born, we have the emotional brain, the limbic brain, online from birth, unlike the cortex, which really doesn't begin until you're 7. And it isn't fully mature till you're about 26, believe it or not. And this is your limbic brain in more detail, and you can see it's a set of different areas which kind of wrap around each other in the center of your brain. I don't have time to go into all the different aspects of this. That's covered in the Reset program. But this is a really important part of who you are, okay? And if your childhood environment in any way was stressful or unpredictable or unsafe, this part of your brain becomes very sensitized to create these trauma responses as a survival strategy. So it's shortcutting action so that you will respond in ways that ensure your survival. And the coping strategies which you developed as a child then become the habits and patterns of behavior, which many of you have come in today to look at. Procrastination, for instance, rumination, these patterns of behavior are repeating despite your best efforts. These patterns are established early in your life. Your ideas about relationships, money and work, for instance, are all based on what you experienced when you were growing up. Not just yourself, of course, but what you saw around you, how other people, particularly your parents, responded to these things, and you basically believe that this is the way the world is. And so we are in unconscious survival mode a lot of the time, repeating unconscious patterns learned in childhood. And as hard as we try, we cannot seem to break them. And I have a question which maybe we can discuss afterwards. And if you want to answer this in the chat as I go, have you noticed any repeating patterns in your life? For me, the pattern I had was that nothing good lasts. All right, and so I would sabotage good things. If I had something really good, it just somehow it wouldn't stick around. Whether that was relationships or a good job or whatever. Is there anything that you're noticing that seemingly is repeating? Because in that case, I think you're running a program. And why can't we just move on and change our responses? Why can't we just decide, I've had enough of repeating childhood patterns, I need to just get on and do it differently? Well, unfortunately, this survival response is very, very strongly encoded in your system. It's really basically your autonomic nervous system is gonna shut you down as a survival response to ensure your safety in any environment which it perceives is threatening to you. So perceived emotional threat or chronic stress. And so your emotional tank is likely to be on full a lot of the time because you are perceiving that there's more threat in the environment than there actually is. And so even small stresses become amplified to create a cumulative stress burden. So, I had in my life my father dying, and that was bad enough, and the ending of my kind of home life, and then I went to university, and that was very stressful, and then having to get a job, and being judged against my peers, and finding that I wasn't as confident as some of them, and then trying to form a relationship, and when that doesn't work or ends, huge cumulative stress in my system, and completely unprepared for it. And what happens then when the system begins to really hit this full emotional tank is that it becomes unable to regulate properly. And this is called nervous system dysregulation. And it's where a lot of people end up living their lives, in dysregulation. You see, the mind considers emotional threats just as bad as physical threats. In fact, I would say sometimes it considers them more dangerous. It has been termed emotional predators. If you imagine, a lion stalking you, it's like having the lion stalking you 24/7. And so it will repress them. It take them away from conscious awareness, below conscious awareness, so you can't access them. You don't know what's going on. And your system can never resolve because it can't switch off, and you stay locked in this permanent stress state. And this explains why symptoms are both so widespread throughout the body, because your nervous system, is linked to every organ in your body and every system, and why trying hard to push through or overcome them just makes it worse, because then you're adding more stress into the system. But I really need to add a caveat here. Your body isn't trying to harm you. It's trying to keep you safe. But what it considers safe is very limited, and it's predicted by your childhood experience, okay? And you end up completely stuck in unconscious childhood responses that you don't even know you're doing. While I'm on the subject of adverse childhood experience, or ACE, I really want to cover this very, very briefly, because it's largely missed out in the discussion of dysregulation. You see, it's not just what's happening now that triggers this response, but any adverse childhood events in the past that were deemed inescapable by your mind-body, okay? So it's not what happened to you, it's your perception of what happened to you. And if you perceive that whatever's going on is inescapable, then that can be traumatic. And it's not just big T trauma. We tend to think of big T trauma as things like, sexual abuse, abandonment, those sorts of things, but also all the common events, the small T traumas that happen to many, many people. Things like having a difficult birth, whether that's your own birth or if you're female giving birth and having to have, emergency surgery. Any form of surgery, especially including dental, that's often missed out. Dental surgeries can be very traumatic. And any form of chronic illness, particularly, as I say, through your childhood years, or maybe observing that in other people around you. Bullying, humiliation, being different or neurodiverse. Now, we're discovering so many people these days are finding out that actually they have a neurodiversity. And of course, it was completely ignored and missed out in the past. It's only recently becoming better known. But for many, many reasons, some children feel different. They stand out. I certainly did. And it's really hard emotionally. And then there's the more obvious one, perhaps, of bereavement or separation, being sent away, or indeed having been adopted, which even if you come from a loving adoptive family, the body records the fact that you were separated at some point from your birth parent. and childhood or parental illness. So what happened to you or what happened to those around you, including accidents. If you witness serious accidents where, you know, a parent was nearly killed or you were nearly killed, or you were in hospital. Hospitalization is another potential trauma. And what about the more purely emotional? Having a narcissistic or emotionally unavailable parent is a biggie. And this is something I see over and over again in my practice, is that children who grow up with a narcissistic parent feel like they don't matter, that they don't exist sometimes, because the parent always persuades them that it's about the parent, and not the child. And so they feel hidden, ignored, and have to develop very specific coping strategies. And as I say, I go into more detail in the program about that, but it becomes a pattern. And how about being routinely scapegoated or blamed or shamed or dismissed? I see this so many times in the people that I work with, you know, told that they were the reason that the parent is unhappy, or the reason that the marriage failed, or, you know, shamed and blamed. And of course, witnessing violence or harm done to emotionally significant others. Now, that can be not just humans, okay, it can be animals in your life, because we tend to get very attached to animals when we're sensitized. So it's a huge range of things, and all of these require us to adopt a strategy to survive, which creates what we call attachment wounds. And these pattern our responses for life, so that we live in a state of disconnect from our true selves without knowing it. That's the weird thing. We think we are the person we are, but we're the adapted or conditioned self. And that's a huge revelation for me. And when I really looked at it, I could see I'd become this hardworking person who never admitted that she didn't know, who never admitted her vulnerability, who just kept going no matter what was happening in her life. And she even, ended up in a job that she was very competent at, but didn't really enjoy. And so we're living an inauthentic life at this point, but we think we're perfectly okay, until obviously something comes along to really wake us up. And so, do you recognize anything in your past here? Another question for you to consider. Anything that you kind of resonate with as I'm going through this? There are so many different things. I haven't covered them here, but maybe that might, give you an idea to sort of think about. And so, my proposition is that emotional trauma or wounding is largely hidden, okay? So even if your childhood was overall okay, you may have a sensitivity to emotional wounding. You see, these attachment wounds, sometimes called relational trauma, are extremely common and completely underestimated. And they form a programmed emotional threat buried in our psyche, which our ego, which is the part of us that kind of believes it's rational and knows everything, is going to defend us against, because it believes that our emotions are reckless and dangerous. And according to Primal Trust, who are an organization that I'm affiliated with, around 50% of all adults carry unresolved trauma. 50%, so at least half of us. I would say more, actually, and often stemming from these early life stresses, and many don't even realize it. And so the toxic stress or trauma is hidden because it's unconscious, so we may not be aware we have it. And since it's not considered in healthcare at all, it stays repressed and unconscious. And therefore, the only way to truly heal that I know of that really works is to make it conscious and allow us to feel and heal, reduce this unconscious stress, and move to a state of increased resilience. Now, we need to understand that what happened to us matters. It's not over as far as your body is concerned. And, the question is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And that's something that, Gabor Mate talks about very, very strongly, Dr. Gabor Mate. You know that the past lives on in you. It lives on in our brains and our nervous system without our conscious awareness, ready to trigger us whenever something overwhelming happens, usually something emotionally overwhelming. And that could be many things, you know, as I say, ending of a relationship, financial stress, the death of a loved one, you know. And how does it do this? Well, we really need to turn to a different model of the nervous system than the one we currently have. And I think the best model I've come across in the last 10, 20 years is what's called Polyvagal Theory. And it's a completely new understanding of our neurology. We know that the autonomic nervous system controls the body, but it's not just a simple on-off system that I learned when I studied it. Sometimes it's also called the parasympathetic and the sympathetic parts of the autonomics. But it's not like a switch that goes from one to the other. That's not how it works. You see, Stephen Porges, who worked on the polyvagal theory, he created the idea. He did some investigations and showed that mammals in particular have two parasympathetic systems, an upper and a lower, what we call the ventral vagus and the dorsal vagus. And that's what this little diagram shows, okay? So the upper is also called social engagement, and it inhibits the lower two systems, all right, of fight and flight, that's your sympathetic system, and your freeze, which is your dorsal vagus, the oldest vagus system. And so this top one is really, really central to making the whole thing work smoothly, because it's able to fine tune and control or inhibit the lower two. And once you understand that, you start to get an inkling why things might go wrong. You see, the SES, social engagement system, acts as a regulator of our neurological balance and our emotional response. And that top level, the upper vagus, and all the associated cranial nerves, by the way, because it's not just the vagus nerve, really, we need to broaden our understanding, but most people still think of it as the vagus, but it's all the nerves that originate from the brainstem. Now, these are essential for physiological and psychological health, but they can sometimes not work so well, and sometimes they can completely fail. And the reason that Stephen developed this idea was because he discovered that in some newborns, the vagus, when it came on too much, could actually cause infant death. And what that was a failure of the vagal brake, if you like, because it would actually come on too strongly. And he couldn't understand why the system of rest and digest would do that. It's supposed to be your calming system. How could it kill you? Well, it turns out it's the lower system, the freeze response, that was killing these newborns. And so that's why he suddenly came up with the idea that there must be something more going on, and his investigations discovered this. And so it does kind of explain better than anything I have ever come across why our symptoms are so widespread, because our nervous system controls throughout the body, why they change over time, because the balance between these three systems is ever changing, and you know, why they fail. Antidepressant medicine, for instance, does not activate social engagement. All right, there's nothing about medications that activate social engagement whatsoever. They are a symptom suppressor. What it does, as an example, I mean, obviously you could pick any medicine here, but it adds more serotonin into the system, which is your neurotransmitter of love and connection, but it doesn't address the root cause as to why you're not getting that from your environment. And of course, it can have undesired side effects. All drugs have undesired side effects. In fact, they're one of the main reasons why people end up sick is side effects from too many drugs. And so this social engagement system, this ventral vagus, your top level vagus, is just so key to reversing the messages of threat and changing the balance of your autonomics. And one of the best books I've discovered recently on this is Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve by Stanley Rosenberg. And he actually worked alongside Stephen Porges. He actually knew him. He was his body worker. And so he got a lot of input from Stephen to write this book. And you can really tell because it's full of fascinating links that I never knew and really explains so much more about the symptoms I experienced when I was going through my crash, whatever you want to call it, breakdown, breakthrough. And he talks about social engagement as being the primate system designed to elicit maternal care to ensure survival. Human babies can't survive without their mother. We would die very, very quickly. And it's also, social engagement is linked to positive emotions of joy, satisfaction, and crucially, safety. All right, and all of those can fall away when you get sick. And because it's much quicker than sympathetic activation, in fact, it's milliseconds compared to the seconds of the sympathetic system, it's able to fine-tune the system. But if things affect our social engagement, it doesn't come on properly and only the lower two systems operate. And this is how, as I've said, many people live in a kind of hybrid state of survival between those two systems. And here's a couple of quotes that really stood out for me from this book. The way other people respond to us is based on a combination of the, in brackets, because I've added this, autonomic state they are in and the state we are in. Okay, so it's a combination of our autonomic state and their autonomic state. Our emotions play out in the interaction between them. Okay, so it's not random. How you respond or how you are responded to is a direct consequence of how your nervous system is balanced. He goes on to say, if we become stuck in sympathetic or dorsal vagal states, that lower vagus, it's often hard for other people to understand our values, motivation, and behavior. Our actions seem irrational, often run counter to our own best interests, and can be destructive to ourselves and others. Okay, and here's all the ways in which we sabotage ourselves, or we end up disappointed in relationships, in business, because other people don't get us or understand us, and sometimes we don't even understand ourselves. And so my final question to you, does that sound familiar? Does anything about this sound familiar to you in your life? Because it certainly does to me. And I do highly recommend the book, by the way. And so moving on, if we don't feel safe internally, and then we suffer chronic emotional stress for whatever reason, if, you know, over responsibility, somehow you're given something that you don't feel you can handle, too much pressure at work or at home, or illness indeed, you know, which can strike anybody at any time, but can be completely overwhelming. And plus we have some maladaptive coping strategies like overworking, pushing through, people pleasing, or ignoring our own needs, our stress response system will begin to struggle, but we may not always notice. Not initially, because we'll have mild symptoms initially and we may be able to dismiss them as just random and, you know, nothing to worry about. But eventually our bodies begin to suffer the effects of this nervous system dysregulation as the major symptoms, things like anxiety, pain, or fatigue. And if something in the present triggers us to engage our fight and flight system, and emotions of anxiety, anger, or fear can do that, our bodies then reenact the past responses of collapse and shutdown, and suddenly we can't recover. And that's the basis of the crash or burnout syndromes that we're seeing throughout. We saw it hugely in, long COVID. People who said, my life was full before. I was very functional. Yes, you were, but you were also extremely stressed. We're seeing that although men tended to do worse in getting COVID infection, it's women who've largely suffered long COVID. It's something like 75%, because women tend to carry a higher emotional stress burden in general, although of course there's variation in that, and some men are highly stressed too. Here's what this looks like, in this dysregulated state. All right, so in this diagram, the black line, the sort of sinuous curve here, is how it should be. All right, your nervous system comes up a little when it needs to activate and mobilize you, and then it goes down again when it needs to rest a little, and then up whenever. That's the pattern. But just looking at the red line here, this is how many people, including myself, live their lives. Certainly I did. And you get a stress that comes along and it shoves you up into this hyper arousal state, which looks like mania, anxiety, panic attacks, rage. Or it can sometimes then shove you down into hypoarousal, and that can look more like depression or disconnection, a feeling of numbness or exhaustion. And you can spend some time up or down in either of these states, or you can yo-yo between them, which is really uncomfortable. It just feels dreadful. And so how are we going to reverse the message of threat? Well, the one factor I think that people are missing here is the sensitivity factor. Now, we also know that symptoms are our body's message of the unfelt emotions that were exiled, unacceptable in our families or to us, of our disconnect from our true self. But why is it that some people are more susceptible? That's the question I asked myself. And I found that the neurological landscape differs in different people, okay? And sensitivity, therefore, is a huge factor, and it actually predicts susceptibility to dysregulation. You see, trauma interacts with sensitivity to create this high reactive state, and these trauma responses, if you experience chronic stress when young, and if your nervous system is sensitive. And that's what the case was for me. And I never realized how sensitive I was until, I started to look into this. And so we become hyper alert to threat, and our stress response is always on. And this becomes our normal, and we don't really know any different because we think this is just the way we are. How do we know about high sensitivity? Well, luckily, there's been some work done in the last few years about how sensitivity varies in the population, and it's not a standard bell curve. In fact, there are 3 peaks, not 1. And some people are just more sensitive than others, and they're labeled the highly sensitive person, or HSP. Here's that group, and it's a very distinct group, okay? We found this in children. It exists from very early on. In fact, some people believe it exists from the womb. These people, myself included, feel things more than other people. And in fact, we're often told we're too sensitive. If that ever happened to you, certainly happened to me growing up. But what it is we find it hard to process things, in particular criticism or rejection. We feel other people's moods or emotions. We ruminate, there's that lovely word. We overanalyze, we obsess about things, particularly injustice. I've seen that over and over again. If things don't feel right to us, we go over and over and over it. And as I've said, rejection or criticism really hurt us deeply. We take time to process new information, and any change whatsoever is very difficult. Whereas other people can manage to adapt, we find it really, really tricky. We can be very sensitive to smells or chemicals or certain foods or supplements even, things that are meant to help us, but actually end up making us worse. And there's electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic sensitivity as well, which is a really big factor. And what about if we're not neurodiverse in some way? Some of us find that we're ADHD or we have autism. It has a lot of overlap with neurodiversity, actually. And I wonder, do you recognize any of these characteristics? Does this describe you or someone you know? You see, neurodiversity has in the past been thought of as extreme cases. People with extraordinary abilities like savants or mind reading, and, as well as some of the challenges that come with being neurodiverse. But what really stands out for me is the huge empathy that a lot of neurodiverse people have for others. And so you see, it's not a failure, but an adaptation. It's an adaptation to a brain that feels things more acutely but can't always process them. And so sensitivity makes trauma more likely. And this little diagram just sort of maps out how highly sensitive people fit with ADHD and autism. And you'll see 20% of people roughly are highly sensitive. 10% roughly, we think, have ADHD. And roughly 2% of people have autism. These could be underestimates. So high emotional sensitivity makes you more likely to perceive threat and thus suffer trauma. That makes sense, doesn't it? And of course, all these neurodiversities are a fact of low upper vagal tone, okay? It may give you alternate capabilities. As I've said, it's not necessarily a negative, but there is low vagal tone present in all of these situations. And it causes the brain to be kind of set towards overwhelm in situations of uncertainty. As I've said, anything that comes along that you don't know how it's going to end or how it's going to work out for you. These things are very difficult for highly sensitive people. And for me, the relationship breakdown was my big trigger. But for other people, I've witnessed its accident, illness, infection, redundancy. You know, there's so many ways in which we can get the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back effect. And the shame of this often adds to the emotional burden. Okay, so I should be able to get beyond this. I should be able to recover, or I shouldn't be experiencing these things. And what's wrong with me? I should be able to sort this. And that creates complex trauma, a form of trauma which kind of embeds itself in our system, causing more repressed emotions, which affect your psychophysiology, you know, your mind, body, and so the symptoms start to ratchet up. In order to overcome this, we've got to soothe our nervous system and create new neural pathways of safety. And that there are many ways of doing this. The big sort of highlight things at the moment are vagal toning and brain retraining. These are the things that you'll see everywhere on the internet. And in truth, I would say the answer is always in the body. It's always somatic. And brain retraining sometimes is good, sometimes not so good. But that which emphasizes connection and allowing the felt experience is usually more successful than the purely cognitive approaches. And so for me, the body is the answer, you know, working from the body. And so I very much go with somatic approaches to healing. And just vagal toning is a key aspect of that, but it's not all of it. And here again, another close-up view of your vagus nerve, in particular the one around your neck and head, which is so key. This is your upper vagus, of course. And you can see how it kind of wraps around the tissues. So in order to heal, my belief is you must connect with your felt experience within a safe holding space. Now, that safe holding space could be something you create yourself, you know, a place at home that's yours, that feels good to you. It could be a relationship that feels very supportive. And indeed, it can be working with a practitioner or somebody who helps you to feel at home in your own body. And one of the ways you can stimulate, you know, this better vagal tone is to start paying attention to how you breathe. Now, as I'm presenting here today, of course, I'm focused on getting the information right. I'm somewhat stressed, of course, understandably, and I'm probably not breathing properly. I'm breathing from my upper chest. And that is a sign from the body to the brain that you're under stress. And so learning how to breathe from your diaphragm by usually extending the out breath. So taking a breath in, maybe for 3 or 4, and then the out breath is longer for, say, 6 or 7. And then sometimes also just holding the breath in between before you change from the in to the out breath. These all rewire your vagus nerve into a state of relaxation. There is also the VU exercise. It's a little noise that you make that stimulates your pharynx and larynx. As you can see, that's a part of you know, your body which is very well innervated by the vagus nerve. And this is an exercise developed by Peter Levine, who's really the grandfather of this work. He's been doing it for, I think, over 60 years. And it's making a foghorn noise in your chest. So if I were to demo that, it's something like voo, and you're just vibrating your vocal cords. And that actually, I can feel the result of that just having done that for a very short time. But you can actually practice that at home. Other ways you can do this: self-soothing arm stroking, sometimes also called havening. That's a common self-touch based setup, and I have demonstrated this one many times. I show people how to do this for themselves. There are variations you can use on the face, the hands, and even around the lips. The lips are very well innervated by the vagus nerve, the cranial nerves. And so that's one that really works. The cranial pull. This is where you stretch the skin at the base of the bony ridge at the back of your skull, the occiput as it's called, and all the cranial nerves exit there. And so just pushing gently in with your fingers and pulling the skin apart, and then relaxing and then pushing back again. That's called the cranial pull. And you can test for yourself how that feels. Maybe you want to have a go later, or perhaps now, and you can feed back to me how that felt. Stanley Rosenberg in his book also introduces something he calls the basic exercise. I think he could have been a little bit more imaginative with the title, but what that one is turning the head against the hands, so cradling the bony part of your skull at the back, link your fingers and holding the back of your head, and then turning your eyes, just your eyes, not your head, to the left and holding. And you do that for about 30 seconds, and then back to center, and then you turn your eyes to the right, keeping hold of your head. And actually this is a lot more successful if you're lying down, and so the weight of your head is in your hands as well. And that one does seem to rebalance a lot of people. And then there's ear stimulation. Ears are also very well innervated by your vagus nerve, and actually just putting your index finger into your ears and wiggling them, or pulling the lobes. Try the left and the right separately and just see, because they may be somewhat different. For me, the left feels better than the right, so it could be that the left is activating my vagus nerve more than the right is. And if you want to see that more, you can check out The Singing Athlete. I do talk about and demo this a lot more in the Reset program, but it's based on this YouTube video. And then there are the practitioner-led interventions like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, because the eyes are also innervated by the cranial nerves. Okay, and so movement of the eyes does stimulate the different nerves in your head and neck, and it also helps you to process emotionally some of the things that happen to you. So it's wonderful for dealing with emotional memory. And EFT, or emotional freedom technique, sometimes also called tapping, is another one I use sometimes in my practice, where maybe somebody's coming up against an emotion or a belief system that they want to shift. These tools are really profound. They don't work on the cognitive, they work on the feeling states, they work in the body, and this is why I think they're far more successful. And then there are the sound and vibration exercises, and I include some of those free in the Reset program, some things you can download and have a go for yourself. I guess you could say the VU exercise is a vibration exercise, and I also include some of the audios that you can use to change your brain state, to create a new brainwave pattern which helps to regulate your heart, and therefore starts to feed back into your autonomic nervous system. And finally, we're seeing an explosion of vagal toning devices at the moment online. No doubt you'll have come across the NeuroSim device, because advertising is everywhere. It's the most expensive device, and supposedly the most well researched, but there are others out there. I have no particular affiliation with any of these, but But a word of warning there, these are largely fix-it approaches, all right? They're very left brain, they're looking at, if I can do this one thing that gets my vagus nerve more toned, then I can recover. And for some people, they do provide a great deal of help and support, but you're still bypassing your emotions here, okay? You're still not looking at the root causes, the unconscious things that you don't want to feel. And so I do have some degree of reservation with this, this approach. For me, lasting solutions are the key. I don't want people to keep spending money on expensive things that don't work. And so that's why I've developed the nervous system reset. You see, it's not enough to try harder, all right, or to tell yourself to stop thinking certain thoughts or stop certain behaviors, or even to redirect your attention via brain retraining or meditate more. I don't think those things work long term. We have to transmute, you know, in other words, transform through feeling the unprocessed emotions of our past experience. And we can only do that by feeling them in safe connection to another, to remove the emotional charge that lives on in your body so that your nervous system can recalibrate from a place of safety back to authenticity, back to who you truly are, your authentic self, which is very distinct from the adapted or conditioned self that you've become. And so I developed my nervous set reset program. Now, this is 3 months access to the groundbreaking emotional audit training course, which I developed specifically for highly sensitive people who've had relational or chronic trauma. Even though they're not aware of it, many people find going through the program, yes, these things truly affected me. So that's a 7-module, in fact, there's a bonus module, so 8 in total module training course. And each module has a bespoke video training by me, a recorded video training with downloadable resources and an interactive quiz to, you know, make sure you understood the information and to kind of, embed that in your system. And that's accessible 24/7. So you can go back to this course over that 3 months whenever you like. I do release each module weekly in the first 7 weeks because I want to avoid the situation with a lot of A-types and a lot of very driven people that they do the whole thing in one go. You really need time to assimilate and embed and what I call percolate with some of this information. And so over the first 7 weeks, it will be released weekly, but after that, it's all available. You'll also get membership of a dedicated group to be able to share your experience with other people going through it, and practical tools to practice at home. So no expensive equipment needed here. Most of the things that I suggest are doable without extra purchasing. And for this time only, and I really mean this, this is not a marketing ploy, folks. We're going to do 7 one-to-one sessions with me to work deeper with EMDR and to embed some of the learning you're having. Because this is the pilot of my new program, and next time we run it, we will do group sessions. So this is limited to the first 7 people because I can't take on more than 7. I had to go through my calendar and decide, you know, how many people could I take on right now. And so this is truly, truly the only time you're going to be able to access the nervous system reset in this way. And I truly believe there's nothing like this out there. I think most reset programs ignore trauma and emotional sensitivity, and they don't allow you to truly access emotionally what it is you've been repressing. And that's really why I am doing what I do. I'm nearly done, folks. Just a quick note of why I called it the emotional audit, the training program that you get included. It's actually, it stands for audit, five letters there: accept, understand, discover, implement, and thrive. And so it's a journey that I take you through from the beginning to the end. There's an introductory and a summary session, so that's where the 7 comes in. And it really does take you through all the information you'll need, plus a lot of the practical tools to get you where you want to go. Now, I am not going to go over this in detail today. if you want to have a look at this, you can freeze the recording and just have a read for yourself. But it really is about looking at past experience, how that has become embedded, all the key understandings from neuroplasticity through polyvagal theory, just to understand what's going on, because that is empowerment. And if you'd like to take part, if you'd really value what I am offering here, then I have a special offer for you tonight. And that is, if you sign up today, or indeed in the next, 3 or 4 days, we're giving £50 off. It's normally £19.97. So it's going to be £50 off there, £19.47, or 3 times £6.70. You can actually pay in 3 installments. And I am only taking on the 7 people, as I said. If you'd like to sign up, I'll be sending out the link, but you can go onto my website, which is alchemytherapies.co.uk/nervous system reset, with hyphens between those 3 words. You can find more information there. You can sign up. It's a fairly simple process. And folks, I really hope to see you there. Just find me on Alchemy Therapies, download my free ebook. I've got a free ebook, Hidden Trauma, if you haven't already accessed that. And of course, my books, which you already know perhaps. And you can sign up for my community sessions there too. And that's where I'm going to stop, I think. And for now, and then I'll come back and stop sharing. There we go. There we are. And thank you so much. I've gone over time a little. I'm so sorry. Does it include, I'm just going to look at some of the questions. Does it include group sessions? No, the group sessions are what I'll offer in the future. It does include a group chat, where you can connect with other people, but it's not sessions with me in a group. And yes, it all sounds very familiar. Yes, it does, doesn't it? It's we're all going through similar issues, I think. And everybody wants to learn how to do life better. That's why we're here, I think. And it's so much easier with another person who gets it. And I think what I offer in this program is the chance to connect at a very deep level with who you are presenting and who you really are, because you may not know. So Lisa, this was 1947 for the full program. That's 7 sessions with me plus access to the emotional audit training course, the 8 module course, over 3 months. 1947. That's in pounds sterling. Obviously, if you are not using that currency, it will convert. But basically, that's what I'm offering right now to the first 7 people who sign up. And I'll be so excited to see some of you there, if possible. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I've got maybe another 3 or 4 minutes. Any comments, any thoughts, anything you'd like to share with anyone? Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I think there's a bit of a lag on the live chat, because I seem to be getting it. Thank you. A bit later than everyone else. Just see if I've got everything. Yeah. Emotional stress from this illness. So ME/CFS is an area, it's what I had basically. It does create its own patterning, if you like, because it's so misunderstood. And it basically it embeds the idea of fear and uncertainty, which of course are huge stressors. So yeah, Maria, I'm glad you thought it was a good revision. I realize when I'm working with people, I don't have time to put over some of the information that I've learned over the years, and so hence why I love to present, because I think it's a way of really showing people what's going on inside, which helps to take away the uncertainty and the fear. So and yeah, Butterfly Rose, oh, lovely name. People often don't know who they really are. They never learn. They learn to be whoever other people wanted. And so this is such a revelation for many people, is to come home to themselves in a way that feels totally authentic. So folks, thank you so much for taking part in my live. It's really exciting to do. I can tell you it was really nerve-wracking because earlier on I couldn't get things to work. So fingers crossed the recording works okay. I'm going to end the stream, I think, now, because we all want to take advantage of the rest of our evening here in the UK or wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for taking part in the first ever live presentation that I've done here. And yes, thank you. And look, I look forward to hearing from you, and take care, everyone. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye-bye.